Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison LaGrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison LaGrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump says he will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Saudi Arabia for Ukraine peace talks soon. Trump's remarks come after a lengthy phone call with Putin, in which the two leaders discussed ending Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Australia and China play blame game as Canberra says a Chinese fighter jet dropped flares near its aircraft as it patrolled the South China Sea, while Beijing accuses an Australian military plane of deliberate intrusion into its airspace. An explosion at the 12th floor of a mall in Taiwan kills at least 4 people and injures 26 others. Officials say the blast was because of a gas leak. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan meets Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Islamabad. The two leaders discuss bilateral trade and defense ties. And French troops will exit Senegal by the end of this year, as the two nations establish a joint commission to oversee the departure. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest from Sudan. The North African country's foreign minister is on a visit to Russia this week. He is courting Moscow to invest in the country's gold, oil, gas and electricity sectors. But something else has caught everyone's eye, and that is an agreement on a Russian naval base in Sudan. The North African country has agreed to a long-overdue deal for Moscow to establish a naval base on its coastline facing the Red Sea. Now, in a joint press conference, Sudan's Foreign Minister Ali Youssef said that the North African country and Moscow had reached an understanding on the agreement regarding the Russian naval base. He added that both countries were in complete agreement on the matter and that there were no obstacles to the agreement whatsoever.
We are working together for peace, stability, respect for nations, and national sovereignty. We have exchanged views on various issues, and our positions are largely aligned. We completely agree with what His Excellency, the Minister, has stated.
However, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has not yet responded to Youssef's remarks or commented on the agreement over the naval base. Russia has for years had its sights on a base near Port Sudan, which has been the headquarters of the Sudanese army and the de facto president, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, since they were driven out of the capital Khartoum in 2023 due to a civil war. Russia began talks to establish a base near Port Sudan in 2017. This was when the former president, Omar al-Bashir, visited Moscow in search of support for his crumbling regime as he faced a popular uprising. The two countries had initially signed a preliminary agreement in late 2020 to establish what was described as a Russian naval logistics hub in Sudan. Now, this would have a maximum of 300 personnel and would also have the capacity to receive up to 4 warships, including nuclear-powered vessels. However, the Sudanese authorities had since appeared to hesitate on the move forward with the plan, and a base never materialized. But now it appears that Sudan is making a U-turn and is willing to go through with the deal. Sudan's army chief, Burhan, has been aggressively lobbying around the international support. Now, this is after the army has succeeded in shifting the momentum in the nearly 2-year-long civil war, with a series of battlefield victories against the paramilitary Rapid Support Force. Moreover, the agreement is also coming at a time when Moscow has been drawing down its presence at its bases in Syria. This was after Putin's ally, Bashar al-Assad, was overthrown in December last year. It has been forced to move its equipment to countries in Africa, such as Libya and Mali. So, in such a scenario, a base near Port Sudan would mean an alternative for Moscow to its base in Syria. Additionally, it would also allow Moscow to expand its footprint in Africa and West Asia. For now, Russia reportedly has military facilities and logistics hubs in African nations such as Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Equatorial Guinea, and the Central African Republic. In recent years, Moscow has been aggressively pushing to become a close ally and trusted military partner in the continent. It has been providing several weapons, including fighter jets, tanks, radar systems, missiles, as well as military advisors to African governments, while it has also offered them mercenaries to fight against growing terrorism. In Sudan, Russia has been linked with both the warring parties in the civil war since the fighting erupted in April of 2023. Russian mercenaries, part of the Africa Corps, have also fought alongside the RSF. But in recent months, Moscow has switched its tactics. It has now thrown its weight behind the army-backed government. At the joint press conference in Moscow with the Sudanese foreign minister, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov raised concerns about the current situation in the North African country and hoped that normalcy returns at the earliest.
We are looking forward to seeing the situation return to normal as soon as possible in a country that is friendly to us and our good traditional partners in Africa.
But with no timeline being given on when the Russian naval base will be built, it remains to be seen whether Putin's dream of greater presence in Africa will be materialized or not. Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Ben Aris, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and is joining us live from Berlin, Germany. Thank you for being with us.
A pleasure to be here.
Now, what is the strategic significance of Russia establishing a naval base in Sudan's Red Sea region? And how does it align with Moscow's broader geopolitical ambitions in Africa and the Middle East?
I think it's hugely important. I mean, this stretch of water, the Red Sea and the Suez Canal at the top of it, is the main route for Europe and the West to deliver goods to Asia. And the control of that piece of water is incredibly important. To have a strategic, a naval base there means that the Russians become players in the geopolitics of that part of the world, in so much as they have the ability to control the traffic that goes through there. And I think it's something like 40% of the world's seaborne cargo travels down that route. And what was lacking is any kind of naval presence in the Red Sea, because if you go down the coast a bit to Djibouti, then everybody's there. The Americans are there, the Chinese are there, the Japanese, the French, the British. They all have naval bases right at the bottom, at the pinch point you can see on your map. And that Russia was trying to get a base there, but had been effectively excluded. And so with this port, then they get military presence in the Red Sea. Having said that, the agreement, as far as I understand it, and the original agreement that was signed in 2000 was for a logistics base. So the idea of this was to be able to service Russian ships and for the crew to have a bit of R&R. And it's not a full-blown military base like the ones at the end of the Red Sea are. But nevertheless, I mean, it gives Russia a toehold in the Red Sea, in this incredibly strategically important piece of water. As for the strategy, I mean, in general, the Russians, well, I mean, following the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian Navy and its presence in the Mediterranean disappeared. But as you mentioned, the Syrian-based Tartus has been a key, and the Russians have invested heavily and built up that. And so now they are a naval presence in the Mediterranean. And this would be another piece in that puzzle, linking with the Red Sea. But of course, and since the fall of the Assad regime, the hold on the base at Tartus in Syria is now in question. So the Russians will be very pleased to have another naval base appearing, because at the moment they only have one outside of the CIS, which is in Tartus. And that's, if they lose that, then they lose a lot of their military power, naval power in that part of the world. So this would be a very welcome addition. So the Kremlin is going to be very happy about this deal.
And Ben, what does Sudan stand to gain from this agreement? And are there potential risks or challenges that could emerge from deepening military ties with Russia, especially given the ongoing conflict and the political situation in the country?
It's a pragmatic choice, isn't it? I mean, the government, the official government, they're fighting a civil war. They've been kicked out of Khartoum. They're not in control of the country. And Putin's policy under the previous leadership with al-Bashir has been to support Sudan and the government. But since the civil war started, they've actually been playing both sides. They've been providing weapons, money, arms, mercenaries, training to both sides, trying to work out, which side's going to take the lead. And with this decision, they've come down on the side of the official government. But then they're also in control of the coast, which is where the port is. And I think for Russia, that's the overwhelming consideration. And for the government, the foreign minister, this will be a blessing, because they need support, and not just militarily and money-wise. Sudan is under sanctions by the states, and the Russians have been backing Sudan in the UN, bolstering the government's position, which it can't do alone. And that's part of the wider campaign of making friends in Africa in order to hive off the whole African continent and bring it into this like BRICS camp led by China and Russia in their geopolitical conflict with the West, with America in particular. And so by doing this deal, they strengthen the ties in Africa. They have another base in Africa, which is very important to them. And they're continuing to build on that in order to keep it out of the Western camp led by the States.
Right. Ben, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and your valued insights and analysis on the latest there. Shifting focus to the ongoing fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo between the army and the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels. As the rebels continue their advance in the eastern DRC, the hearing of a historic case has begun at the African Court on Human and People's Rights. For the very first time, the court is hearing an interstate dispute brought by the DRC against Rwanda over alleged human rights violations. The case was filed in 2023 at the African Court in Tanzania. Kinshasa claims that the M23 rebel group and Rwandan forces have been engaged in armed conflict in the mineral-rich Eastern Kivu region since 2021 that has killed and displaced thousands of people. The DRC has asked the court to mandate Rwanda to remove its forces, stop supporting the M23, as well as provide reparations. Now, in the most recent fighting that flared up a month ago, M23 rebels have seized significant territory, including Goma, the largest city in the east. They are now advancing towards South Kivu's capital, Bukavu, and have seized two towns on the road to the city, Ahusi and Kehele. Now, some visuals have emerged from Ahusi, where the Congolese military commandos were seen pursuing the rebels and cautiously moving along a path.
Let's all follow this small path carefully, slowly. Be ready to shoot if you hear anything move, even a tree. We are fighters, tracking the enemy until we cross paths with them. The people you see are soldiers. Keep a 5-meter distance. Let's hunt the enemy down where they were last seen until we eliminate them. We must ensure they are driven out of this hill. This is the commander, Colonel Jaribu, speaking. We are pursuing the enemy to their last stronghold as they have just fled toward the village of Matuna Kamba.
And these clashes come as fighting has re-erupted after a calm of 3 days, following a regional summit attended by Rwandan and DRC presidents last week. Despite calls for ceasefire, the M23 rebels continue their advance. Meanwhile, tensions are also escalating with other African nations. Burundi, which borders both the DRC and Rwanda, has warned of retaliation if its troops are attacked by the M23 rebels in DRC. It has accused Rwanda of being a bad neighbor. Burundi has sent around 10,000 soldiers to South Kivu to support the Congolese army. So far, at least 20 peacekeepers, including 14 from South Africa, have been killed during the clashes between M23 rebels and Congolese forces. Involvement of foreign soldiers risks the crisis to escalate into a regional war. Overall, more than 3,000 people have been killed and 2,880 have been injured, with over 500,000 displaced in the fighting since last month, as per the United States. Amid the crisis, the DRC has also shut its airspace for aircraft registered in Rwanda. How will it further complicate the situation? We will continue our coverage of the DRC crisis. And now turning our attention to the DRC's neighbor, Uganda, where a prominent opposition leader has gone on a hunger strike. Now, Kizza Besigye, who is a prominent opposition figure, who has been detained by authorities after getting kidnapped from neighboring Kenya last year, has now gone on a hunger strike in jail. On Thursday, his wife took to social media platform X and informed that her husband was on a hunger strike after being detained illegally. She added that President Yoweri Museveni's regime was fearing Besigye's defiance more than it respected the law. Meanwhile, following media reports, Besigye's lawyer said that the opposition leader began the hunger strike in protest that aimed to show his discontent with the detention.
Disposed, that is a matter of fact, since Friday, but also as earlier communicated by the Honorable Winnie Byanyima, he had contemplated going on a hunger strike out of frustration and disgust with the impunity going on, because right now he's in illegal incarceration.
Now, Besigye's lawyer further reportedly said that the hunger strike was beginning to take a toll on the opposition leader's health. He noted that Besigye needed specialized care that health authorities in the prison were not equipped to provide.
They evacuate him, take him to a facility with capacity to deal with his condition. They should quickly and immediately shift him, transfer him to any facility that can handle him outside the precincts of Luzira prison.
However, a spokesperson for Uganda's prisons has reportedly denied that Besigye was on a hunger strike. Now, Kizza Besigye is a member of the Forum for the Democratic Change, or the FDC. He ran to become the president 4 times, but lost every time. He is a trained physician. He was once the personal doctor of President Museveni. He is also a former military officer. He was also once a close ally of Museveni, who has been ruling Uganda since 1986. However, later he turned into one of his biggest critics. He has faced dozens of arrests since he joined the opposition over 25 years ago. Now, in November last year, Besigye made headlines when he was detained in neighboring Kenya in what senior Kenyan foreign affairs officials described as an abduction. He was subsequently brought home, presented in front of a military court, and charged with illegal possession of firearms and treachery, which carries the death penalty. Additionally, he has also been accused of inciting violence when he led a protest against high commodity prices in 2022. But Besigye has denied these charges, and his wife has called the trial a sham. For context, Besigye's trial has come at a time when Uganda has been significantly cracking down on opposition. Several prominent opposition leaders who have sharpened their criticism of Museveni have been arrested and put on trial in military courts in recent months. This is despite the Supreme Court banning the government from trying civilians in military courts. Last month, Uganda's Supreme Court called such military trials unconstitutional and ordered the transfer of all such cases to civilian courts. However, President Museveni has dismissed the court's decision and vowed to challenge it. Moreover, criticism has also mounted, especially from the United Nations and rights groups, over the government's human rights abuses and suppression of the opposition, including detentions, torture, and extrajudicial killings. But while the government has repeatedly denied those allegations, it has continued to arrest opposition figures in the run-up to the presidential elections in 2026. And for our last story, we shift our focus to Southern Africa, where debates around land reforms continue to make headlines, after a controversial land law in South Africa has triggered tensions with the United States. Neighbouring Zimbabwe has begun compensating white farmers whose land was forcibly seized more than 20 years ago. While the Zimbabwean government says the move aims to boost ties with international lenders, it is speculated that it is actually linked to US President Donald Trump's reaction to South Africa's land reforms. Is Zimbabwe's decision really a Trump effect? Watch this report to know more.
Zimbabwe is paying millions of dollars to foreign white farmers whose land was forcibly seized under the country's controversial land reforms over 20 years ago. Zimbabwe will pay over $145 million to around 94 foreign farmers in the next 4 years, with $20 million paid out of the 2024 budget. Those who will be paid are from countries such as Switzerland, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and the former Yugoslavia. Zimbabwe has signed a bilateral investment protection treaty with these countries. The government says with this, it is honouring its commitments to compensate those who lost their lands after controversial land reforms. In 2000, Zimbabwe under President Robert Mugabe began seizing property from thousands of white farmers and giving it to blacks. The measure was meant to redress colonial-era land grabs. At independence in 1980, most of Zimbabwe's fertile land was owned by just 4,000 white farmers. However, the measures to address the issue were violent and aggressive. Critics also said the seized land was handed out to President Mugabe's political allies, and many of the black beneficiaries were not given the equipment or training to farm productively. This resulted in the collapse of Zimbabwe's agriculture-based economy and also ruined relations with the West. Cut to 2020. The government under Mugabe's successor and incumbent president Emmerson Mnangagwa offered to return land to foreign and local farmers. It pledged to pay a total of $3.5 billion to the farmers driven off their land. So far, the government has begun paying only to the foreign farmers, though it says the move is aimed at normalizing relations with international creditors for ongoing debt clearance dialogues and improving Zimbabwe's investment climate. It is speculated that Zimbabwe's actions may be linked to the suspension of United States aid to South Africa over its land expropriation laws. US President Donald Trump has accused the South African government of confiscating land of white farmers as President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the land seizure law last month. Though Ramaphosa has clarified no land will be seized forcefully, US-South Africa tensions have reached an all-time high over the issue. Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa has expressed intention to work with Trump. He has also backed Trump's decision to deport illegal immigrants, including around 500 Zimbabweans. While Trump's aid cuts don't affect Zimbabwe, it could be that the president does not want to be on his bad side. And, looking at what has been happening in neighbouring South Africa, he might want to dodge the bullet before it gets fired.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
hello and a very warm welcome. I am Gusheen Garland and you're watching First Post. In the next 2 minutes, I get you the top 40 updates from around the world, only here on Fast and Factual. Let's get started.